Tonight, we are bringing you a story that Vladimir Putin does not want the world to hear. At this very moment, the Russian president is broadcasting a carefully crafted narrative to every corner of the globe. According to Moscow, Russia is winning. According to the Kremlin, Ukrainian defenses are crumbling. According to Putin himself, victory is inevitable and imminent. But we have obtained intelligence assessments, battlefield reports, and expert analysis that paint a dramatically different picture. What you are about to hear could fundamentally change everything you thought you knew about this war. The truth is that Russia's front lines are not advancing. They are fracturing. Russian soldiers are not conquering new territory. They are being ground down to the breaking point. And Putin's elaborate propaganda campaign is being exposed for exactly what it is: a desperate fabrication designed to create leverage that simply does not exist. What we uncover next may surprise you. Stay with us. For months now, Russian state media has been making bold declarations of major territorial conquests. The cities of Pokrovsk, Seversk, and Kupiansk have all been proclaimed as captured territory. These announcements were not random. They were strategically timed, often appearing just hours before critical diplomatic meetings with American envoys traveling to Moscow earlier this December. The timing was deliberate. The message was clear. Russia wanted the world to believe it holds all the cards in this conflict. But here is what Moscow will never broadcast on state television. Every single one of those cities remains under Ukrainian control tonight. Not one has fallen. In fact, Ukrainian forces are actually gaining ground in some of these contested areas. The Russian claims were complete fabrications, manufactured specifically to create bargaining power at the negotiating table, power that does not actually exist on the battlefield. This is not speculation. This assessment comes directly from Colonel Yano Mark, who serves as Chief of Staff of the Estonian Defense Force. On December 15th, Colonel Merck stated publicly that information operations and domination in the cognitive domain are specifically aimed at influencing the West and the United States. The goal, he explained, is to create a false narrative that Ukraine's front is on the verge of total collapse. Think about what that means for a moment. A senior NATO military official is publicly confirming that Russia is running a coordinated disinformation campaign targeting Western decision-makers. Putin wants American and European leaders to believe that continuing support for Ukraine is pointless. He wants them to conclude that Ukraine has already lost, so they might as well cut their losses and walk away. But the intelligence tells us something very different. And what comes next reveals just how desperate Russia's situation has truly become. The Institute for the Study of War has just released a devastating assessment of Russia's actual military capabilities. Their December 14 report concludes that Russian forces will likely continue to struggle to maintain the Kremlin's desired multi-pronged offensive operations across different operational directions due to the long-term material and manpower costs of such operations. Let me translate that from military jargon into plain English. Russia cannot sustain what it is attempting to do. The Russian military is exhausted, dangerously under-equipped, and stretched impossibly thin across a front line that now extends nearly 800 miles. That is roughly the distance from New York City to Chicago. And Russia is trying to maintain simultaneous offensive operations across that entire distance. Ukrainian military analyst Konstantin Mashevets has documented specific cases where Russian units have reached their absolute breaking point. In the contested settlements of Oleksandrivka and Huliaipole, Russian forces are so depleted that they cannot continue operations without major reinforcements. But here is the critical problem facing Putin right now. Those reinforcements do not exist. The eastern grouping of forces operating in these areas would need troops and equipment pulled from other sectors of the front. But weakening one area to strengthen another creates new vulnerabilities that Ukraine can exploit. It is a classic military dilemma, with no good solution. Russia is robbing Peter to pay Paul across 800 miles of contested ground, and they simply do not have the resources to maintain pressure everywhere at once. Something has to give. And the cracks are already showing. This next section contains some of the most significant information we have uncovered. Please stay with us. If you are finding this coverage valuable, we ask you to take just a moment right now to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. Your support directly helps us continue bringing you the real story behind the headlines that other outlets miss. We appreciate every single one of you. Now, let us continue with what may be the most alarming revelation yet about Russia's deteriorating position. The logistical networks that keep any modern military functioning are collapsing both inside occupied Ukraine and within Russia itself. Ukraine's 429th Separate Drone Regiment, known as the Achilles Regiment, recently confirmed the destruction of a critical supply pipeline near Kupiansk. Russian forces had been using this route as a safe corridor to transport soldiers and equipment while avoiding Ukrainian fire. That lifeline is now gone. The consequences have been immediate and severe. Up to 200 Russian soldiers are currently encircled in Kupiansk, with no prospect of resupply or rescue. Ukrainian counterattacks are inflicting hundreds of casualties on forces that have been completely cut off. This is not the image of a conquering army marching toward victory. This is a military in serious operational trouble. But the crisis extends far beyond the Ukrainian battlefield. Inside Russia itself, the railway system that military strategists have long considered absolutely fundamental to Russian national security is deteriorating rapidly. Russian Railways, the state-owned monopoly responsible for moving millions of tons of cargo, including critical military equipment, has seen its profits collapse by an astonishing 96%. By October of this year, the company was officially posting losses. It now carries approximately $51 billion in debt, with no clear path to recovery. When Russian Railways fails, everything fails. Military equipment sits idle in depots hundreds of miles from where it is needed. Critical supplies never reach the front. Exhausted soldiers go without the basic equipment they need to survive, let alone fight effectively. And the evidence of this collapse is visible everywhere on the battlefield. Reports from the Lyman sector indicate that Russian troops are now being sent into combat without helmets or bulletproof vests. Dozens of units are assaulting fortified Ukrainian positions without basic protective gear, not because Russia lacks the industrial capacity to produce these items, but because the logistics network simply cannot deliver them to frontline units fast enough. The situation has grown so desperate that Russian forces have reportedly begun using donkeys to transport ammunition and evacuate wounded soldiers from combat zones. Donkeys. In a 21st-century military conflict involving a supposed superpower, armored vehicles and trucks that should be performing these functions have either been destroyed by Ukrainian drones or sit unusable due to maintenance and fuel shortages. The casualty figures tell the true story of this war. United 24 Media has documented that Russia exaggerated its territorial gains between January and September by more than 1,200 square kilometers. Meanwhile, Ukraine recorded approximately 25,000 confirmed drone kills against Russian forces in October alone, with the heaviest concentration in the Pokrovsk direction. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has stated that Russia lost roughly 100,000 soldiers in just the first 6 months of this year. Current estimates suggest the real toll may now be double that figure or even higher. Now consider what awaits Russian forces if they somehow manage to capture Pokrovsk, a city they have been assaulting for 18 brutal months at catastrophic cost. Beyond Pokrovsk lies the Donetsk fortress belt, a dense, layered network of military fortifications, stretching dozens of kilometers across high ground with overlapping fields of fire. Military analysts assess that breaking through to the major strongholds of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk would require Russia to fully commit forces from multiple operational groupings while completely abandoning offensive operations elsewhere. At the current pace of operations, intelligence estimates suggest it would take at least 2 more years and hundreds of thousands of additional casualties to breach these defenses. And that calculation assumes Russia can maintain its current operational tempo, which, given everything we have just documented, appears increasingly unlikely. So why does Putin continue pushing this false narrative of inevitable victory? The answer lies in the peace negotiations themselves. Kremlin spokesman Yuri Ushakov stated explicitly that battlefield progress influences the nature of negotiations. Putin believes that manufactured perceptions of strength translate into real diplomatic leverage. If Western leaders believe Ukraine is losing, perhaps they will pressure Kyiv to accept unfavorable terms. But the deception is unraveling faster than Moscow can sustain it. Western intelligence services and independent analysts are documenting battlefield reality in real time. The gap between Russian propaganda and ground truth has never been wider or more visible. The fortress belt may ultimately prove to be where Russia's military finally breaks. We will continue monitoring this developing situation closely. The story Moscow tells and the story written in blood on the battlefield are two very different narratives. Stay with us for continuing coverage.